What's up?
This is episode 3, technically 4, because we both, whatever happened, the audio was fucked and
we messed up.
Yeah, we recorded a full 45-minute episode a couple.
So I guess
weeks
we
ago.
can call it episode 3.
Yeah, we're gonna call it episode 3 for lack of a better term. Just get to it.
Talking music production and me just learning the ropes and learning all these big words and things.
Exactly. So just diving right in. Enjoy.
Okay, let's do it.
Yeah. DAW, digital audio workstation. There's so many. I mean, really, a digital audio workstation, a DAW, is kind of just synonymous to any preferred tool. Some people will use Machine, which is a box where you have a little screen and it is a digital audio workstation. So basically, you just hammer it out and you do it physically on the actual box, and then you can export it to
like a Chaos Pad.
No, a Chaos Pad is a little box. It's an outboard piece of gear where, you basically have a sound and you go. It's basically like a flanger and a filter and a bunch of and like a granular distortion and all sorts of stuff. So a Chaos Pad is literally what you think of when you think of Chaos Pad. So Chaos Pad is just another piece of gear like a MIDI keyboard or whatever, right? But basically, so the DAW is on your computer. Pro Tools is like the main DAW that people use for like film and really professional audio production. You can use anything. Fruity Loops or FL Studios now. It used to be they got sued. They got sued. Ableton Live is my personal favorite. GarageBand is like the built-in Mac version, like dumbed down for dummies Mac version of Logic, which is what you're using there. So Logic is like professional paid version of GarageBand essentially. Yeah, and then you have like Cubase, you have Reason, there's Reaper, which is more of like an open source version of a DAW, which is really fucking cool. You can customize the shit out of it, but it gets pretty complicated with some of these. So what I always say is at least stick to one DAW. They all have the same functionality, essentially, when it boils down to it. It's all about workflow and how you can actually operate, move the MIDI, or like what the program is capable of, and if it's intuitive or if it's non-intuitive. So I find Ableton Live to be extraordinarily intuitive, easy to learn, but it's also extremely versatile. So you have like your general landscape kind of layout like you're using right now, working on a trance track there. But you also have a performance view layout. So you can switch over to the next tab and then it'll basically just put it out all in blocks. So you can just like launch different blocks and loop and you have all the same functionality. It's just a different visual way to lay it out. So you can use like Ableton Push. So once you produce a track and you have all your different like elements and filters and all your stuff set up, you can just like launch a channel and then maybe you'll have like 4 tracks on that channel which will launch at the same time in a certain time signature, and then you can like independently mess with the effects and the variation of all those things, and you could add another loop, and then you could drop that and then go down to your next channel and like launch it for the drop, and it'll have like your main 4, maybe a couple extra for like a lead synth or whatever's coming in. It's pretty sick. So that's why I like Ableton Live is because it was built for performers. So as a producer, it's allowed me the ability. So like in the first podcast, we were talking about how the difference basically between a DJ and a producer, right? And you always call me a DJ, but mainly I just produce. And then when I perform live, I'm taking all my production and I'm breaking it down and I'm loading it into a live format on Ableton Live because that's what it's designed for. That's why they built it.
Kind of like Serato or something?
So, well, no, Serato takes digital songs and basically converts it to the needle, so you can actually play with physical vinyl copies. So the vinyls are essentially
or
blank.
CDJs or whatever.
Yeah, so they'd be blank. Basically, it's just like an MP3 or whatever it is, not MP3. You never want to DJ with an MP3 because the sound quality is shit. Always want to use high lossless files like a WAV file or FLAC or whatever. But same thing. So all DJing is just taking one complete track and another complete track, matching the key, matching the beat, and the timing at a particular part in the song where it sounds good, and it'll have a nice clean transition that hopefully nobody can even really notice. Or if you do notice, you're like, wow, that was good, that was clean. Otherwise, you get what's called train wreck, right? Which is like two opposing beats that aren't matched up. It's like, or two opposing melodies, which I find even more gritting to the mind.
Start fucking clashing, yeah.
Yeah, so you'll have like, you know, a minor harmony, then a major chord comes in, and it just sounds like a horror story, you know what I mean? Some kind of crazy shit, and it's just like, what is this guy doing? So that's why there's things like mixed in key, where you can go through, you can key out your tracks. So Serato just takes full songs, converts it into digital things that you can physically use vinyl and turntables and a traditional mixing board in order to get your result into mix. CDJ, same thing, except for instead of vinyl and a needle, it's just CDJs. So you have like a little USB cart, right?
Yeah.
So it's good for DJs. So if like you're a DJ and you have like some of your own music and other people's music and you show up to a show, all you need is your little USB plug. That's it. You're good. Rather than carting big packs of vinyl. Same with Serato, right? So you just have your digital files, hopefully lossless, high quality files, especially when you're playing on full, big, beautiful systems that are properly dialed out and tuned. Because if you don't, you're just going to hear the shitty artifacts of an MP3. Or it's just like a super condensed file where they've cut off a lot of high and low information, which typically you can't hear, but when you are playing on a big system, at Shambhala, at Burning Man, or where any of these places, right? Like, you want that quality. Yeah, so you never bring out MP3s unless you absolutely an artifact? Have to. Artifacts, you'll hear like pops, snaps, weird like distortion, crackles, anything like that. Missing, basically just missing information.
Because, like, what was I going to say? Until I plugged in those, like, studio speakers, like, I don't know. I bought ones that are, like, $300 or whatever. Mm-hmm. So they're better than, like, you know, my fucking shitty old laptop speaker or, like, headphones or something. But just, like, most of the bass line when I was making the arpeggio, you, like, can't even hear until you have it on, like, really loud speakers because some of them are so low. You know
yeah, so that's the thing. So you can't, and people here can't see it, but in the studio, like, I have my monitors, and then I have a sub, right? And there's a crossover from the monitors to the sub. So these, and then I've set it at 80 hertz, which is pretty typical. So these don't put out any information. My Atom A7Xs don't put out any information below 80 hertz. And that's all designated to the subwoofer. And the subwoofer can go down to, it goes lower than I can hear. But the point is you mainly feel lots of those sounds. So when you're producing, the whole point of me in the studio and having the acoustic treatment is that if I play a sub, like a low sub bass, that sub bass might be playing from like 120 hertz down to like 20 hertz. You know what I mean? But I can't really hear any lower than 50 on whatever, right? So the sub or a good set of headphones or whatever it is allows you to hear that information and properly control it. Now, like in terms of mixing and like production, sorry, I'm just kind of riffing here. In terms of mixing and production, the low end is probably one of the hardest things for producers, especially bedroom producers, to control because either their studio isn't balanced and designed. Like I use a sound pressure level meter. See that blue thing? You can pass it to me here.
Oh, what the hell?
Yeah. I mean, it's about $150, just a professional sound pressure level meter. And what I do is I set it up exactly in the listening position in the room, like perfectly. And then I use like a 1 octave wide bandpass filter, so I'm only allowing 1 octave of a singular tone. And what I do is I use pink noise because pink noise excites the entire frequency spectrum. And if I only let one little sliver of that octave out, I can filter it down and play just the 20 hertz spectrum. I can filter it up. I can play the 50 hertz spectrum, 80, 90, all the way up to 24K, whatever it is, right? And then so I'm measuring it here, and then I use the crossovers built into the actual speakers, and I adjust where my high and low crossover is for the subwoofer, for the monitors, and I adjust the high and mid frequencies from the back of the Atom A7Xs. And that way, all of my frequencies are level and balanced from the listening position. So when I'm producing, if I'm playing a big, deep bass note, right? And it's just like, whoa, 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 whoa. And it's anywhere from 80 to like 30 hertz. I can hear it with the same volume that I'm going to hear like quick hi-hats, or, like fluttery synths or whatever it is, right? So all those noises are balanced for me. So if I'm playing a bass and it's way out of control and like super loud and jacked up, I can hear it. And one of the biggest issues that like, new producers or bedroom producers have is they'll be using headphones and shit, and they can't properly hear their bass. So they'll just pump it up in the mix so they can hear it in the headphones and it sounds good. And then you go out to a show or you go in your car or whatever and you put on your track that you just made and you're super stoked and the bass is just way blown out of proportion.
So to like mess your speakers up or something?
No, I wouldn't mess your speakers up, but your song sounds like trash because suddenly your bass is muddling out every other element of the song and it's just, right? So having a subwoofer, having a properly balanced audio environment, some acoustic treatment, and all of that combined really creates like the perfect zone to have a really good mix, because it all comes down to the mix. If your mix is good, your bass, your kicks, your snares, everything's like in balance, nothing's out of control, but you want like some dynamic variability. So, you want some of your kicks to pop, you want some of your snares to, to pop. And you don't want like you don't want your sub to overwhelm your kick or whatever. So some people will, they'll put a little gap or like they'll put a slight delay, or they'll actually, some people, this used to be a really big thing, they'll use side chaining, which basically
yeah,
is a
you
side
gotta
chain
explain
compressor.
that. Matt tried to explain that to me, like notes dropping while bass is playing. Or...
Yeah, so like basically you have to understand compression in general to get it. So like there's a threshold, which is the level of where the compressor is going to kick in. There's the volume, there's the output. So basically, like let's say you have for the sake of this example, I'm gonna use kicks and sub, right? So if you want your sub to dip when the kick is happening, basically you say it's a side chain. So you put a compressor on your sub, and then you side chain it to your kick. So every time that the kick comes through and goes, right? What it will do is that it will, according to the adjustments that you've actually made for the sidechain compressor, depending on how fast the tack, what will happen is it'll drop the volume of the sub right when that kick happens. So it's like, right? So it dips down so you don't hear the sub, but then it comes back up to the output that you've suggested, right? And then it'll come so you'll hear the kick, and then the sub will like kind of rise, but you adjust it and you tune it so it's synonymous. So it's a symbiotic relationship between the kick and the sub. So it just gives a little bit of room so you hear the fatness and the transient and the pop of the kick, but you still have the clean, full sub that's in there.
So does that matter for all genres? Or is that like, is dubstep going to matter more than something, you know what I mean, or hardstyle than like trance, where it's
totally.
just like
That's a great
bass
question.
is woven in the arpeggio and then has just like a small kick on top, you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a really great question. It's, for me, using sidechain compression is all, like, some people use it as a coloring tool. Excuse me. So they won't use it so much for mixing purposes or creating space or what I was just talking about with letting the kick come through. Some people will use it just for, in extremes, to get like a pumping kind of motion in their synth or in the song, like a you know what I mean? It's more just a coloring tool, like any like reverb or delay or that kind of stuff. But you can use it in the mix as an actual mixing tool if you do it really subtly and carefully, which, if used in that context, can be used for trance, for dubstep, for for hip hop and whatever, and it's very common in many genres. But when you get the colored style, like old like synthwave and stuff like that, they would literally just be like pumping the waves of the track throughout the whole thing, right? As a textural. As a preference.
Because, like, I remember in the comments in this one, Armin van Buuren, it was, like, one of those big room ones, and, like, they, like, someone in the comments, like, wow, that sidechain at 45, and whenever I was listening to it, I was, like, didn't even know where it was. I was trying to, like, listen for it, but it was kind of almost, like, they were, like, it was, like, notes going, like, dun, 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 then they had a breakdown where it was kind of, like, boom, it was, like, whap, 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 you know what I mean? But it was kind of, like, almost sounded like they were phasing in and out, but, like...
Some of that might not even be sidechain.
Yeah, and that's why I was like, I don't know if the person in the comments didn't know what they were talking about,
so
or if there's different ways to use it. Or...
As a producer, like I said, I don't really use sidechain in that way anymore. It was kind of like the fad and whatever, like 2016 to 2018, people were doing a lot of it. There's much better ways to integrate your 808s and your kicks, or your subs and your kicks, or any other instrument for that matter. And it's just building it all manually. So what I do with my subs and my kick now is essentially like I'll have my kick and it'll be tuned to my sub and everything. And then I'll just adjust the attack on the sub. So the rise and attack, I'll build the sub with the attack to coexist with the kick. Which is essentially, it's not a side chain, it's not pumping it every time the kick, because the side chain creates a dip where it pulls it down and then it pushes it up, right? So instead, I just build it so, the kick is, and then the attack is just synonymous with it. Like they're just working in symbiotic.
So do all genres have like behind the kick is a bass?
No. Because
no.
I mean, when you hear like garage or even lots of trance and stuff, they'll just have long Reese style basses. So they'll just be like,
okay, yeah,
and then they'll just have kicks just on top.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I know like in hardstyle where it's more like rom bom bom bom, but then like in the trance it'd be like there was like a like dun 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 dun, but then in between it was like doo 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 doo,
So basically, like when you hear 808s and typical like trap music and hip hop and all other forms of production in that sense, 808s specifically are designed with the kick. Or sometimes the 808 is the kick. Right?
Okay.
And so in those genres and situations, you're not really going to get like a sustained bass note and then just kicks throughout it. It's going to be designed essentially so it's like whatever, and that is like that's the kick, that's the bass, that's the beat. Or like all typical trap and that kind of stuff. That's what it is. So there's a lot of different tools. I think the sidechain tool is a good start for people to start understanding how that works. But once you really get into production, you build everything and you make the room for it. So it's not necessary. I hardly use sidechains, and when I do, again, I use it more in a colored texture kind of place.
And another thing I was thinking too was just like Matt when he was talking about like negative space when I was like first making the song, and I'm trying to like actually layer it, because I think I'm thinking like too much of like maybe it's like my mind when I see the songs on TikTok that are like 30 seconds or a minute and you're just only hearing the clip of the drop, and I'm not thinking of like, the old trance songs would be like 4 minutes, 8 minutes, 12 minutes, like the build up where you're starting with all the like percussion and then like having negative space and then maybe just the melody without the kick and reintroducing the kick. Yeah.
Dude, yeah, totally. So trance is really big for the fucking
Build?
The builds. But it is a tool in all music production. You have a bridge, which, will transition from one space to another in a song. And then, you have a little bit of a breakdown, then it'll drop. It's all the same theory and understanding. Like, it is, like, but it's used in extreme and trance because that is the style. That's the trance style. Some of these songs are 8 and 10 minutes long. You know what I mean? And and they're also designing it in mind for other DJs and, for producers too, but because producers do play a lot of other people's music sometimes when they're doing sets, but they're thinking about the full context. They're thinking about people on Molly tripping out at a party. They're thinking about like, you're at a rave and like how can you have a 2-hour long trance set, right? And so all the people producing for this is it's very intentional. Yeah.
Because, like, one thing, like, I've been trying to, like, think about that might, like, like, elongate my trance songs, just, like, when, I'm going right into, like, there being some sort of synth or something, when, like, the old school songs, it would start with, like, a piano, and then build up, and then drop into, or fade into it being, like, electronic piano. You know what I mean? Like, the old school ones, where, like, now, like, nowadays, like, you hear most of the music's just, like, straight to the chase. It doesn't really build from like sounding like a classical orchestra, like Tiesto elements of life. It's like fucking violin and shit at the start, and then fucking starts going like trance. You know what I mean? Like that. I remember back in the day, like it's kind of making a resurgence now, but like on State of Trance, like Armin van Buuren was saying, like even like fucking Calvin Harris is making trance now. Like for some reason, drum and bass and trance are like making a huge resurgence where they like really dropped in popularity, like to dubstep and trap music for like a decade or something, and like big room, you know, like the most popular shit is still like house and deep house and fucking electro, but like it's kind of cool to see like the shit, like, you know, normally it'd be like, oh, that sounds fucking old or whatever, but now people are starting to be like, ooh, I miss that old sound, you know what I mean? It's nice to hear that. So
it's classic. We do need you know what, soft transition from music, but I think culture is kind of like that, you know, where I don't know if we're hitting a kind of a creative collective brick wall with the internet and everything that's happening and the amount of information and media that we are consuming, but what I've noticed, it's just my personal opinion, is not just in music, like you're saying, people are, you know, looking back at the past and finding things that are nostalgic and beautiful, like, the, you know, whatever, the drum bass, the trance, even just like classic soul music and sampling for hip hop, or Leon Bridges, great example, you know what I mean? It's like, what, the brother's like 28 and he's, you know, he sounds like, you know, he sounds like one of those amazing, like, soul singers from the 60s, you know what I mean? Like he's just got that vibe, but not just music, like all the recreating of, you know, like Marvel movies and fucking all, like it's like we can't think of anything original anymore. It's like our creative faculties have kind of like hit their cap. It's like you've shot a couple of loads and you can't go anymore. It's like it's like just fucking poof. So it's like, I don't know if it's for the better or worse, but like we seem to be not regressing, but just rehashing everything. It's like we can't, and then it's like we're diluting it. So rather than creating, you know, new hero stories for our life and, you know, stories that people really connect with, or music and all of these across culture,
just remaking.
We're just rehashing it.
Yeah, that's kind of weird.
I mean, it's a hot take, maybe. There is some people doing weird, good stuff, but the thing is, it always takes up to 5-10 years for any of that to really ever catch on, if it does.
Like me trying to figure out what funk music is.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. Did you see that meme I sent you?
Yeah.
About like,
it is confusing.
Like, God, why did you have to do this to me? And then he's like, what? You're just trying to mix a whack funk beat.
Not me trying to figure out what funk is. It'd be weird to say, like, I created a genre.
Yeah, like Ama Piano that my friend is really into, I was talking about. Like, there are some niche things, but at this point, they're still also underground in the scene. Like, it's not something that anyone would really have any context towards. But now with TikTok and with social media, those scenes get exploited way too quickly rather than letting them mature and flourish.
Like when there was like fucking Skrillex on a Coca-Cola commercial, I'm like, what is this dog shit? But you could tell like panel of old people like, the kids love the dubstep, it'll sell so much cola.
They love his side shave head.
Yeah, which is fucking weird to think about.
Yeah.
But yeah, dude, like, I don't know. And I think like trance too is like, maybe people like, you know, kids are low attention spans, like, oh, it's too slow, yada yada. But like, I feel like
not too slow, but maybe too long, monotonous, or too repetitive.
Like, but now I'm thinking it's like kind of like almost like when the podcast format's coming back, like people are starting to desire. There's certain people who like want to listen to something for a long time, and have a conversation build up or a song build up. Where before it'd be like you know, old commercials be like, you literally have 5 seconds on YouTube or 15 seconds on TikTok to like get your song across. So just like immediately drop the beat, you know what I mean? Just get all fucking like excision or something. Like
immediate
I feel like
gratification.
Now that's kind of like going away from that.
That is the one good thing, yeah. So I mean, it is a juxtapose because social media in general has been about immediate gratification, right? Or recently it is, especially with TikTok. 15 Vine, 10-second, 15-second videos, and then TikTok has now expanded it to whatever, 3, 5.
Yeah, 10
minutes.
I think.
10 minute, yeah.
Depending on how big your account is, they let you do bigger.
Oh, you should have been live streaming that. I totally forgot about that.
Oh, that's fine.
Yeah, whatever. At least that was our saving grace last time because I fucked up on the audio or when something happened.
I dropped the box or whatever.
Whatever.
We didn't have that.
But Yeah, attention span. So I do like that podcasts are helping create more of a long form format that people are excited about, because it allows people to go deeper and actually get to know someone a little bit better rather than just having some kind of fake image up or quick 15-second look at my life at its perfect finest, right? You get to see more of the flaws. How I'm speaking right now, you can hear how I stutter sometimes, or lose my train of thought and have to figure it out again. So it really does bring more of a human element back into social media. So I do like that. And maybe you're right. Maybe that is helping facilitate other art forms that are online, like trance and that. Now, I'll be straight up and honest with you. I've never been a really big trance fan. I always went to a lot of festivals and stuff, and it always kept me the fuck up as it's like in the background.
Yeah.
Like just constantly. Yeah. But you know what I mean? But I had some friend, my Murray, who before I ever even started DJing or producing, he was producing trance and super good, like great. He's a teacher and he has a kid now and stuff, and he kind of like didn't really get back into it. But the community that I was in and involved with was all like psytrance, trance. That it was that big. But I was like the ambient, down tempo, IDM, super syncopated, like really obscure kind of person. But again, I do appreciate helping and working with you on music and stuff, because like I was saying with the sidechain compression and all these variables, it's really all the same tools. It's all the same toolkit. It's all the same music theory. It's all part of the same language, right? So even if I'm not like a personal trance guy myself, I still appreciate all of the elements that go into it, right?
Yeah.
And some of it's stunning. Like some of it blows me away. Like I wouldn't necessarily want to produce something like that because it's not something I listen to, but it's like, wow, that's pretty fucking cool. Like 2 weeks ago when we did our last recording, which failed, and I was kind of producing that song for 20 minutes afterwards before he left. It was like that bass line and the weird, like it was just cool. Like I just had fun. Like it was just creatively a fun thing, and it was so out of my element that I kind of, I was kind of fucking stoked on it, right? It was like, damn, this is great. But other than that, I wouldn't really go out of my way personally to make trance. But I think no matter what, we do need more people making and creating culture right now.
Yeah. Because, like, what I was thinking, too, like, I remember back in the day when I was more, like, in the, whatever, raving scene or whatever, like, I listened to more, like, hardstyle stuff and, like, hard trance. But then I realized, like, I was listening to hardstyle, I was like, I don't like this when there's no melody. And that's kind of, like, even some of the big room stuff, like, there was certain, like, Hardwell songs and other, like, Timmy Trumpet or whatever, I'm trying to think, like, where they're good for raves, but as soon as you're not, like, at a rave or at the gym, you don't want to be like, you know what I mean? You don't want to, like, turn it up. And I realized, like, back in the day when I listened to all those, like, old emo bands and metalcore bands and all that shit, all I ever really liked was, like, the crazy guitar riffs, you know what I mean?
The melodies, and when they actually...
that's kind of, like, what my jam was, so I was just like, man, it'd be, like, nice, I was thinking, like, to have trance music that sounds more like that metalcore music, but like without the harshness of the screaming or the bass. You know what I mean? Just like,
or some like melodic screaming. There's some cool variations.
More so like just without vocals and just having like the melodies, but then maybe having some of those like kind of more like breakdowns. You know what I mean? Like I remember they had trap and they were calling it like trap style. It never caught on. It was like hard style and trap. It like there's like no one did it. It's for some reason no one had attention span for it, but like I kind of was thinking back, like there was a band that played with System of a Down called Mars Volta, and they were super weird. But before Mars Volta, they had one called At the Drive-In, and they were like breakbeat, so like their like BPM would change like 5 times in a song. They'd be like, you know what I mean? And then just back to calm. So that would be kind of cool to like have that, but maybe a little more structured build up, so not just like where did that come from or whatever, but like just in terms of like if there was some sort of like weird melodic trance, but they could have some sort of like break beats or something like that.
And there is lots of that out there. I mean, but you're totally right. There's a series of time, and it's still happening now. There's a lot of like producers, especially local, like in the subchakra game, that they all do like just deep bass and dark bass and some, dubstep and garage and that. But a lot of it is, and this is no insult to anybody, but lots of it is void of melody. It's kind of just like that, just like deep, dark, whatever, basement, like rave style stuff, and some brilliant production and really cool textural stuff. But it's like, I really personally, as a writer and producer, I crave the melody.
Yeah, like the
singing,
journey. It should
and
be like
writing
a story,
songs, So I more think of myself just as a songwriter, and then I produce and I create and I work with other singers and stuff like that. But, if in your journey, if you could, start integrating, finding more of that melodic element for, it's like hardstyle trance and whatever, I think that'd be a good marriage.
Yeah. And like, I think now too, it's like, I still like hardstyle, but like, I just like some of the like, there's this one guy like Hard Driver where like he would have like that
Driver.
great,
I like that.
He totally fell off once he took off his helmet. He was kind of like Deadmau5 where he wore a motorcycle helmet. But he had songs that were like fucking sick at a rave. But when you like aren't at a rave, like it'd be the kind of thing your parents are like, turn that shit off, because it's just like too insane.
Yeah, just too.
It's like
too
almost
much.
like when you're like people are at the Excision or whatever, like shit like that, where like you can only listen to that shit at like a Shambhala or something without it just sounding like this kind of sounds. Not retarded, but it's just like this sounds
it's too much,
too insane for like a normal scenario where it's like this is the kind of thing that would like totally be like hyping you up or something. But
exactly, yeah. But if you're dancing, you have a good time with friends, you got a couple drinks and maybe some whatever in you.
Maybe I'm just getting old, so like I'm like
just getting old.
Like,
yeah.
I'm like I just want to relax and on a journey, but more like that kind of like euphoric and nostalgic shit. Like even like Gareth Emery, like he's I don't know if you know who he is, but like he's kind of like. He plays on sets of Armin van Buuren, like at his like A State of Trance, like his podcast. He does like a live podcast where they do 2-hour sets or whatever. And like he was doing like he does vocal trance, but also those like really complicated arpeggios. So like he'll have like
building the arpeggios from scratch rather than
really
using
he doesn't use an arpeggiator or whatever, and he's really building up the like. And the girl, like, in this image, whatever. But they're like, he's still going, and they're actually sick. Like,
fuck yeah.
Like I don't know. It's nice to like see that there's some DJs that like no matter what the trend is, they just like stayed doing whatever it is. Where they'd be some like I'm trying to think. There's some people like Hardwell and WW. They would kind of like if like trance got harder, they would go harder or whatever. And like there was some place like people that Phil really like there's these guys. I remember seeing them and meeting them. It was Above and Beyond, and there was another guy's Tritonal where like they maybe made a little more dance orientated stuff, but they kind of still like had their roots, or you could tell it was them. Even like Phil would put on like, oh, that's a Tritonal song. So maybe like kind of like I remember there was that Martin Garrix guy with that Animal song. He like once he made that song, it seemed like he had that kind of template where he would kind of have the same style drop, the same kind of synths, and like maybe it's like people once you have a success, you find out what people like and you keep that similar sound even though you're changing it up.
I agree with that. And I wish I can corroborate it, but this is the thing. I have that sound. Not that sound that you're talking about with trance. It's completely different. But I have my sound. And no matter what I do, no matter what kind of... If I'm trying to produce something completely different, my sound always comes out. And it's kind of just a part of me. It's just what has developed over time. But when I first started... It was all over the place. I didn't really have it. So that it could be like maybe it's just way beyond me, and he probably is. Obviously, he's much more successful. But it could be that he found the template and the niche and what people like and then decided to continue it. Maybe it's a combination. And it could also just be naturally where his sound is
just
brought
his
him to.
method of production,
Yeah, and like the kind of samples that he chooses and the kind of synths that he builds and everything else, right? And it might be a combination. So that's kind of what happened with me. So like eventually I found my place and my sound. And then I kind of found a structure in how to execute that in a way that people liked. And that, that got me 700,000 plays on the song and whatever, that kind of shit, right? So, it might be that. I'm not sure.
Because
I think it's a combination though, just from my own personal process. Like it's for me, even if I wanted to, it's impossible to get rid of that sound. Even if I make something totally new and crazy and ridiculous, and I use totally new samples and synths and everything, you could still tell, you'd be like, that's a flore beat.
Yeah, I guess it's the same as like maybe drawing or something where like, you know, there's just a certain style like comes ingrained in it.
Talking and walking, it's just like the patterns are mental patterns and how our brains develop as we're learning new things and channeling new routes. It's kind of, yeah.
And it's weird to think about repetition too, where like some people say repetition is a bad thing, and then other people, like there's some rappers that are like, oh, I use repetition in music like on purpose, you know, and like you hear the Star Wars noise when there's a guy gets thrown over, like I think it's like Boba Fett or whatever in Star Wars. Luke Skywalker, in one of the older ones, is like rescuing Han Solo or something, and the guy falls into that pit with that monster with the teeth, and you hear ah, and it's like this same fucking soundboard. You hear that dude dying, that weird scream on like so many movies. And normally you're like, do they not have
brings
enough?
You back.
It's like they're doing it on purpose.
Yeah. It creates triggers, right? Yeah. Mental triggers. There's this one song. Fuck, I forget the name.
It's like some weird social engineering almost, where they like, you know, they keep a certain soundboard because it's nostalgic. Yeah. So I'm wondering if like when an artist has a successful song, maybe you end up keeping notes that you think will remind people of you. You know?
Yes, absolutely.
It's almost like you're compounding on like you're keeping your winners, you know, in a trading sense or whatever. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And like, and lots of producers, and I've followed suit. Like I have a drum kit. I guess I should call it a sample pack that I've made. So it's drums, samples, tons of vocal recordings, everything from the studio, different things, me crushing cans and like affecting it, making little snares and stuff, and like, you know, tapping on shit and getting weird, recording weird sounds.
Foliage, is that what they call it in the theaters?
Foley, yeah. Because in movies, what they'll do is they'll literally take like chains and like drag them. And everything's all fake sounds. It's really funny. Yeah. So what I do is I've built my own drum kit, and I also have all the synths, serum synths that I built. I have all the massive synths that I built. Not all of them, but select ones that I like that I put into the kit. And anyone can go and download it for free online. Plug. On my Bandcamp, check it out. I'll put the link below. You can go and download my drum kit, and you can make a song completely from that. And it has like kind of my elements and tags and stuff, right? So there's certain sounds that I've noticed that people do really fuck with and like throughout my music and my time in producing, and then I will reuse those as a psychological, like, bring it back. Even just vocals, someone's vocals, but then just like cut it up and drop it in.
Or someone, I guess, if you got positive feedback, so, hey, I really like the kick in that, or like the snare. And
totally.
I wonder if there's one song that's just an amalgamation of all 10 of what everyone liked. Or
exactly. This is the signature flore kick, you know, flore kick. The signature snare or whatever it is. Like, there's definitely, And other, obviously, I'm not very popular in terms of production right now, but there are super popular producers that build kits and drum kits and sample packs and stuff that people will use. So you'll, especially in like bedroom producing, and if you're in a community like on SoundCloud and active in it, you'll hear a lot of similar and reoccurring samples for sure. And especially in movies and all, all
that's that weird, shit. Dude. Because it's like weird how some artists are like total willy-nilly and other artists are so methodical. Like the guy from Weezer, I remember he was like some weird data scientist type dude. And he's like recording all of the words that were the most popular from previous albums, and then like also taking words that were the most used in the English language and the most popular that year.
Data analyzing his own
and
stuff.
Then, so the lyrics of his songs were like specifically composed of all like popular and culturally relevant words.
My question is, did that album or song or whatever was created from that process? Was that even more popular and better than the original stuff?
I can't remember. All I remember is them talking about how he's like, he talked about how he's like a nerd. And how he's like super into like the numbers and all that shit.
Well, yeah, I think if you are to be into production, especially, like if you're a DJ, you don't have to be as focused with that kind of shit. But attention to detail. Like if I was to open up some of my production, some of my songs and like show you the whole project, it's crazy, and like everything is customized. Like I'll have a reverb fade at a very specific time to match with like a certain snare and foley texture pattern, and then like, you know, maybe that reverb will adjust and like extend to the next bar and just like softly fade out before another. Like everything has its place. Everything is panned slightly different in this particular area. Instruments, like in the entire audio environment, everything has its place. Everything is EQ'd, crossed over. Like there's not one sound or element that is just thrown in there. And it, you know, it's funny, like it'll take me 2 hours to write a song and like just like jam out some stuff and like have a good idea. It'll take me a month to mix it and just like fine tune it and polish it and just like put that love into it to make it, give it that real professional, clean and balanced, you know what I mean? And again, it's some shit you don't want that. You want more of that gritty, kind of slap it together, lo-fi vibe, whatever. But having attention to detail, and I'm not a nerd necessarily, but I have that quality of focus.
So
that really allowed me to have more success with production. I've been producing for over 10 years as well. So
what's EQ again? Because I'm trying to. What's the difference between like EQing and mastering and like velocity? Is that all just levels of volume or?
Okay, EQ is the most basic fundamental thing. Like you know, you have any standard like stereo has a high, mid, low. EQ just stands for equalizer. So you have all your audio spectrum. You have your low, your mids, and your highs to break down to 3 stupid categories, right? If you have a real proper equalizer, you can put up like thousands of different points and like manipulate. Velocity has nothing to do with EQ. Velocity is like velocity comes into play when you're using MIDI, right? So if you have a MIDI controller and you hit that really softly in real life, if this is a real piano, it would just be like the hammer would hit the chords really soft and you just hear like a dong. But then if you hit it hard, it's like dong. Velocity is the detail and the pressure, the speed, the pressure, and the timing.
So it's not just volume. It's like how hard you smack the note.
Yeah, so that's what. So when you're playing MIDI, velocity gives you a little bit more of a natural feeling. So in your MIDI notes, you can program them, you know, by hand, and then you can independently adjust the velocity so it sounds more natural, or you could just have it all firing 100%. You know what I mean? So it's velocity just gives you a little bit of more of a natural flow. It's kind of like when you ask about quantization. Quantization is where you have different MIDI notes or just physical waveform notes or whatever it is, and then it will lock those to the grid exactly on the 1 and the 2 and whatever in between, right? Which gives it a really robotic sounding feel because your drums will just be like, and it won't have any swing to it.
So sometimes you actually want to go off a little bit?
Sometimes you want to go off because when you're like playing the drums, like sometimes like that snare isn't always going to be exactly on.
It might be like 3/4 of a.
Like a millisecond, just a natural, or when you're singing or you're playing on the keyboard and you're just playing something like it's like you have a metronome, doot doot doot, bam, 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 right? So you have like you can play to a metronome, but every time your actual fingers are hitting the keys. It's going to be just slightly fractional seconds off or on. Sometimes each of your fingers are hitting on like maybe you'll hit this note slightly before the next one, right? But it's still a chord, so it gives it more of that natural feeling. Now, if you're just recording, actually, and you're playing a beautiful piano melody, and it sounds great, but then you hit the quantize, and suddenly it just goes, locks it to the grid, you'll be, it just sounds different. It sounds weird. So you do want some swing. You want your kicks, your main 1s and 2 kicks, you want to be locked in. And I actually have,
or whatever.
Yeah, so onto my Signal Path Productions YouTube channel, I do have I think it's a 16-minute video where I go through and I talk about the basics of quantization and warping and all that kind of stuff. And I go fairly deep, but it's still like a 101 style introductory to it. Yeah, so you want natural. So EQ is basically just manipulating the entire frequency spectrum. So if you don't want bass, you could just drop the bass down low. So let's say you're playing a synth, which is like a mid-range synth, has some nice high notes to it. It might be a lead synth, right? Kind of takes up the same range as vocal speaking. But it also has low elements in it, which might be clashing with your sub or your kick or other lower elements that you have in your song. What you do is you EQ, you equalize, you can cut out the lower frequencies. You can also filter them out or whatever, but an EQ is just, you can manipulate. And let's say you want a little bit of like, your synth is nice, too much low, so you cut the low out, maybe at, let's say, 180 hertz or 220 hertz, right? So it still has a little bit of body and beef to it, but it doesn't affect like any of your low end. And then let's say you really like how the mid part of it sounds, but you want a little bit more airiness to it, you want a little bit more high, then on that same EQ, you can go and you can just bump it up, put a little high shelf on it, and emphasize more of that air, so that'll come through in the mix, and then also clean your mix by cutting out that low end, allowing your sub and your kick to come through. So EQ is just a tool to help you sculpt a sound or an overall sound. Now mastering, which is the last one I think that you mentioned in there, mastering is just, it's like if you're a jeweler or you have like what you build watches or some shit, and after you're grinding stuff and it's all mucked up and dirty, what you do is you polish it, and you have different polishing stones, and you can buffing it out, and then you make it shiny and beautiful.
You're just cleaning it out. It's like proofreading, or
yeah, essentially. But you can't do any mixing detail. Like you got to make sure your mix is all
You're
balanced. You try and basically the mastering engineer shouldn't have to correct any issues in your mix. Okay, like if your bass, like let's say we were talking about that synth where I said you should cut off the low, maybe in that particular example, to help your sub come through. Let's say you didn't do that and you send it to your mastering engineer. Your mastering engineer goes, hey man, the song sounds great. This one synth is conflicting a bit with the sub. I'll do my best, but the only real way that can be fixed is in the mix. Can you go put an EQ on it or put a filter cutoff, at this frequency range of that one synth, and it'll help clear it up, right? So those kind of details you need to do in the mix. Mastering is just the polishing. You're not taking out a knob, or you know what I mean. The product is done, and hopefully they don't need to do much.
So would it be like if there's bad mastering, like let's say like when you fucking watch a really shitty movie and you can barely hear them talking, and then suddenly they cut to a thing and the fucking music's just cranked, and you're like, you have the volume of your TV on 80 to hear them talking, and then suddenly your TV's like blowing up. What the hell? Yeah.
No, that's very
or is
different.
That intentional?
So film and audio is very different in that sense. I mean, there's tons of crossovers, but what they're doing is they're creating dynamic range intentionally to create impact in the movie. And it's specifically impacting the theaters and that kind of thing. So it's like when you're in a moment and it's like soft and there's someone talking and then like someone comes in and starts fucking banging. They want that contrast to be as impactful as possible. And I when you're watching movies at home and shit, it fucking sucks.
Like jump scare type shit?
But and I find it a little out of control. I think they could normalize it a little bit more. I do agree with you 100%. But that's different from the mastering process. I mean, you want dynamics in your mix and in your masters. There is kind of what's called the loudness war these days, where people just want to compress and pump up their songs to be as loud as possible, and the waveform looks like one solid brick. So you don't get any like clean transient or distinction between kicks and everything else. Weird. And if you look back in music, like old classic rock and stuff, they used to like emphasize the difference between the dynamic in the mix. So rather than having your vocals compressed high with your kicks compressed high, it's like vocals are clear and the kicks are like bam coming through, but so there's lots of dynamic range, right? But mastering, just to wrap it up and not get too long-winded here, mastering above and beyond just being a polishing tool utilizes EQ, compression, reverb, spatial analysis, like a spectrum, compressors, filters. The mastering toolbox is very similar to lots of the tools that you also use in production in the actual mix. But it's used in a different way. Like I said, you're not going to cut off, you're not going to, in your master, let's say I'm mastering one of my songs, I'm not going to be like, well, I don't like the bass, I'm just going to go at 80 hertz and just do a hard drop. It's like, that's part of the song, you know what I mean?
Okay.
Like, I'm just going to be like very subtly adjusting certain...
Just little.
Yeah, super
nuances.
little. It's...
So what about, like, for instance, in the tutorials I was watching about, like, the arpeggiated melody or whatever, from, like, other things, when I looked up, like, on piano and guitar, they were just saying arpeggio was just kind of like a broken chord, so you're, like, chopping it up. But would that be kind of accurate? Yeah, so, but, like, he was taking the velocity and lowering it, just for the example, like, on the notes, but he's like, don't be lazy like me. He was like, people normally, like, if you have a bar of, like, 8 notes and there was 2 bass ones, he was, like, saying, like, this one down 20%, this one down 20%, this one down only 10%, and then this one. Because I noticed
it creates, so that creates what I was talking about earlier with the natural feel. Because if you, let's say all of them are at 100%, it would just be like, bang, 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 right? Rather than like, bang, 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 bang,
yeah,
bang,
for how
bang,
hard you
bang.
hit it, that explained it really good. I didn't really think of that.
Yeah.
Because, like, I know my mom had an old school piano, so I know what you mean where that really, like, dong, and when you, boom, it almost sounds like a different note or whatever.
Yeah. It's the harmonics of the instrument, essentially. It's, you know, there's timbre, there's all sorts of elements within a sound, right? Yeah.
And second.
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, there's lots. So mastering, I mean, all these terms in production, it's like there's probably a production Bible out there where they have all this, but it's, you know, like we started off the conversation talking about DAWs.
Yeah.
So that's the thing. Every DAW has equalizers. Every DAW has compressors, has reverb, has delay, has all the things you need, right? But each one of them is maybe just built a little bit differently, or different programming or algorithm behind, you know, the mechanics of how, and it's all math, of how their one compressor works. And that's why people will often buy VSTs, you know, VST, virtual synthesizer, blah, 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 VST. Is that right? I'm totally fucking that up. Sorry, guys. But it basically virtual instruments.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Right. So Massive is a VST. You know, or plugins. Plugins is another generic term for it. You know, Massive, Serum, Waves does all sorts of EQs and compressors, and there's vocoder, everything. You basically all the inboard stuff that you can find in a DAW. There's a third-party developers that make the stuff, right? Virtual. I want a VST. Virtual Instrument and Sampling Libraries, VST.
How does that stand?
Yeah.
Whatever. Interesting. But yeah, so, because yeah, that one that you were talking about that starts with an S, I'm trying to think, like lots of the trance dudes seem to have like lots of plugins from there. But,
Virtual Studio Technology, for fuck's sakes.
But what was it?
Yeah. So just to finalize my point, I can't believe I didn't realize. Sorry, guys. I say I'm a producer, but I don't know the acronym for fucking VST. Virtual Studio Technology. So, like, some people might not like the EQ that's built into Ableton Live, so they'll get a Waves EQ. They'll pay money for it. They'll get a higher quality one. But the thing is like, really when it comes down to it, outboard gear. So like the solid state Logic, that DBX unit there, all of that kind of stuff is going to have a cleaner, more warmth to it. It's going to have a more powerful effect than a virtual thing. So that's why people like real studios, they'll have like racks of EQs and compressors. Proper mastering engineers will have like, it'll be all outboard gear. It won't be a program on the computer. But it's a good way to, like, you know, if you're producing, you know, you're using Logic, I'm using Ableton Live, but we can both use Serum, right? And you can both get the quality of Serum's, wavetable synthesizer. Even though we're using different DAWs. So that's a really good, kind of bridge. But it's really all personal preference and how you like the tool and what you want. But so every, when you're learning production, if that's what you really want to do, like understanding how compressors work, like wet, dry, all this stuff.
I'm starting to understand that.
Attack, delay. There's all these basic components which are copied across many different like effects, essentially. Like wet and dry is you'll see that on an EQ, you'll see it on a reverb, you'll see it on a compressor. It's basically like after you've dialed in your settings on either one of those devices, it's the mount of that setting that you want it to affect. And if it's 100% dry, you're just going to get the original signal without any of that compressor or reverb, whatever you've done, affecting it. And then you got 100% wet, it'll be fully saturated with that. And typically I'll never, like, unless you're doing certain things, you don't go in any extreme. You always find some balance of it, right? Like that sidechain compression. Unless you really want your synth to like, boom, boom, to pump, then you'll go like 100% wet. You'll put your threshold all the way to like as low as it can go. So it'll basically drop the sound to 0. Put your threshold at minus 14 decibels. It'll bring it from where it is just down to minus 14. Actually, threshold works a little bit differently. Threshold kicks in at that setting. So let's say a kick is happening and the kick in the mix is hitting about 14 decibels or like minus 14 decibels, but you want it louder. You put your threshold down to, let's say, minus 12, and then you put your gain up, and the compressor will kick in, hearing that it's hitting around 12, and it'll push it up and bump it up, or it works in reverse. Like it all depends on how you set it.
So I'm trying to think of rapper. Sorry, just to put an example so I can kind of understand this. So there was this rapper XXXTentacion. He would do the bass.
The guy that died.
Yeah, he died. But they would do the bass purposely distorted. They would really crank it. Like you would hear it in your headphones, like.
Yeah, it just sounds like farts.
So do some people do it on purpose, like a stylistic?
Totally. Yeah. There's no rules. Like it's all. I mean, there are there's general guidelines, and if you want a professional like sounding mix, you're going to be writing a song or like doing some more singer-songwriter stuff. You're not going to have that. But if you want someone that wants a Yeet style beat where it's you have like super distorted kicks or whatever, it's really all preference.
It's like those weird comments on YouTube, like some 14-year-old, my headphones awesome.
Yeah, right?
Wow, that 808 was crazy, man.
See, like I like big sound, but I also just like the clean. I'm really just about balanced, clean production. Yeah. And that's what people hear. And they're like, wow, how do you get your mix like that? It's because some people just don't want that. They're not looking for it. And the people that do, they look for it.
It's just weird, though. Like, I'm trying to learn all the knobs and bells and whistles, and I'll crank something, and sometimes it just, like, totally, like...
Adjust how it sounds completely.
Like, attack or something, and, like, it sounds, like, so messed up. I'm like, what the hell did I do?
Or maybe it sounds cool. That's the thing.
Or sometimes it's cool, yeah.
I think we're going a little long here. We should probably wrap it up. We're almost at an hour.
Yeah, I was thinking whatever. We can do that next episode.
We were going to talk a little bit about Silicon Valley Bank and the fucking
we can do that next
first
time.
Public Bank. Yeah, we'll talk about the financial collapse of our world and on next episode.
Yeah. I don't know if you want to record a fucking intro after.
Yeah. So let's just say goodbye and then we'll record.
This is, highheatrichie, and you can find me on Twitter at chefboyardoge or TikTok at highheatrichie.
Flore in the house. Flore.lore on Instagram. Flore on everywhere else. It's always synonymous. Flore. I'll put the links in the description. It's much easier than me just wrapping it out. Thanks so much for listening to my rambles about production today, guys.
Yeah, there's so much to learn. So many words.
There's a lot. This is just to really touch the surface. So, yeah. Peace.
Yeah, thank you. Peace.